I had an ominous feeling as I gazed out into the cornfield, which was barely lit up by the moonlight. I had an unnerving premonition that something deadly awaited us inside. I was about to turn around and go home when I felt a hand grasp mine. I couldn't help but smile as I gazed down into the beautiful blue eyes of my new girlfriend, Hannah. We had only been dating less than a month, and I could already tell I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. She started walking towards the cornfield, and I knew I would look like a coward if I didn't find her. We had just passed the first few stalks when my best friend, Tony, ran up and tapped Hannah on the arm and yelled, "Tag!" before running off. A mischievous smile crossed her face as she immediately tagged me and said, "No tag backs," before doing a little curtsy and hopping away. I could hear my friends laughing in the distance as I began jogging forward to find one of them. I stopped dead in my tracks as I walked into a clearing to find a scarecrow hanging there. A shiver ran down my spine as I gazed up at him, as there was something unsettling about him. I heard a noise behind me and turned around to see what it was, but didn't spot anyone. I was about to leave the clearing when I noticed the scarecrow had turned his head and was now facing me. I walked forward on feet made of lead and tapped his body, and was relieved to discover that he was stuffed full of straw. I was almost bowled over as someone came sprinting out of the stalks and ran directly into me. I didn't even think about it and immediately tagged my mate Barry, and I saw the disappointment on his face as I jogged off. I'd only gotten a few feet away when I heard a blood-curdling scream behind me as I stood there frozen in terror. It took me a few minutes to gain the courage to walk back into the clearing. Barry was nowhere in sight, and the scarecrow was still hanging in place. I was about to walk off when I heard a dripping noise, and I cautiously approached the scarecrow. I had to place my hand over my mouth to stifle my scream as I discovered Barry's hanging corpse in place of the scarecrow. His eyeballs had been plucked out of his skull and replaced with straw. Blood was pouring from his body, from dozens of wounds, and slowly dripping onto the floor. I began backing away until I collided with something soft. I turned around and was now face to face with the scarecrow. He kept turning his head as if studying me. I could see straw poking out from numerous places from his clothes. Tony ran into the clearing and ran face first into the scarecrow's back. He let out a grunt of annoyance and was about to run off when the scarecrow's arm shot out and gripped him by the throat. Tony was lifted off his feet, and I could see the panic in his eyes as he tried to free himself. He opened his mouth to scream, and I watched in terror as straw shot out from the scarecrow's body and into Tony's mouth. It was like a never-ending stream, as it kept going until Tony's futile struggles finally stopped. Tony's body was unceremoniously dropped to the ground as the scarecrow turned his attention to me. I darted to one side and barely evaded his grip as I disappeared amongst the rows of corn. I kept glancing to all sides in the hopes of finding the edge of the cornfield. But all I kept finding was more corn. I kept spotting the scarecrow in the distance as he seemed to be hunting me. I tripped over something and let out a sob as I pushed myself up to find the bodies of two of my friends. Their heads had been ripped open, and corn had been forced down them. I let out an almost manic laugh as they reminded me of Pez dispensers. I urged myself to keep going with my one target of finding Hannah and getting us both out of here. I considered calling out her name, but knew that would probably draw unwanted attention. I was about to give up hope of finding her when I found her sobbing on the floor, clutching the body of her best friend. Their arms had been ripped from their body and lay on the ground a few feet away. I helped her to her feet and had to practically drag her along as she was almost comatose. I almost let out a howl of joy as I spotted the edge of the cornfield directly ahead. I had just reached the last row when I lost my grip on Hannah. I spun around and was almost face to face with the scarecrow. He was holding on to Hannah in a vice-like grip. I waited for him to reach for me, but he stood motionless. I looked down to discover that I was outside the cornfield and realized he couldn't leave it. He began stroking Hannah's hair, and I could tell he was trying to taunt me. Hannah seemed to finally wake up from wherever her mind had gone and began shrieking at the top of her lungs. The scarecrow flinched away for a second before placing his hands on either side of her skull. My eyes widened as I saw the straw forcing its way into her ears. She went deathly silent as I watched the straw moving around inside her eyeballs. A single tear ran down my cheek as the scarecrow pulled her mouth open and a stalk of corn began growing inside. I turned and fled, knowing that there was nothing left for me here. I returned the next day, and I stood there, immobile, gazing at all of the scarecrows scattered across the field. I began pouring the petrol at the edge of the field, whilst being careful not to step inside. I was about to light the match when each and every scarecrow turned to face me. I threw the match onto the petrol and hoped that this would avenge my friends.